So Kakadosh, we're going to be continuing on Daf Kuf Bet Amud Aleph. This is 102A1. 102A, Kuf Bet. There's a Mishnah on the top of the page, 3 lines down, where it says, Neged Anigrar. Okay, we're talking about, remember the Neged Anigrar was the Briach. This is talking about the door stopper, right, which was basically to block the door. So the Briach, which is tied to the door, but it's not actually hanging in the air. Okay, which means that it's very, very long, and therefore it's nigrar, it's lying on the floor. So if you remember, I'll just show you this, share the screen for a second. Here it is. Yeah, this is nigrar. Nigrar means that since the rope is very, very long, it's dragging on the floor. Here, it's the rope is tied to it, and therefore you could actually, let me make it bigger, here. Okay, so here, the case is that you're able to see that it's dragging on the floor because the rope is very long. Here it's hanging in the middle of the air. So it says here, No'alim bo b'mikdash, you're allowed to come and close the doors on Shabbat of the Mikdash, because since it's only Nisur D'Rabbanan, so therefore in the Bet HaMikdash they did not decree on anything which is D'Rabbanans. Okay? And now he comes and he says, Avalo b'Medina, but not outside of the Bet HaMikdash. Because since it doesn't look like it's tied onto it, the rabbis, they made a decree because it looks like you're building. Okay? So now he comes and he says as follows. He says, okay, the munach, one which is munach, which is just placed on the floor, which is this picture here, right? If the neged is just placed here, but it's not actually hanging anywhere, right? Kan vekan asur. It's going to be asur whether it's going to be in the Bet HaMikdash or outside, because here, right, it's going to be boneh mina Torah. This is something completely different. Here's mamash boneh. Okay? Rabbi Yehuda says, hamunach is going to be mutar also in the Bet HaMikdash, but vanigrar is going to be mutar even in the Medina. So it's like a completely different shita over here. He says the fact that it was already prepared before Shabbat to use it for this, so therefore it's not considered boneh on Shabbat, and therefore even if it's not going to be tied to the door, it's going to be okay. Okay, fine. So now says the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braita. Ezu neged anigrar. What is the neged anigrar? So he says, Ezu neged anigrar sh'olim b'mikdash avlo b'medina kol shekashur v'talui. You need that it's going to be tied, and hanging. Yeah, virosho echad magia la'aretz, and one part is on the land, okay, which means it's touching the ground. So it's not mamash on the ground, but rather one part is on the ground. Rabbi Yehuda says, ze'af b'medina mutar. Even in the Medina, meaning outside of the Bet HaMikdash, is going to be mutar in such a scenario. Ele'ezer neger, right? What is the neger shenolim b'mikdash avlo b'medina? Kol sheno lo kashuv lo talui. Right? It's not hanging and it's not tied together. But you just put it in the Keren Zavit. So that's the concept of the munach. So it comes out that Rabbi Yehuda is arguing on the Tanakama. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying, even if it's not going to be tied or hanging at all, as long as it's going to be, right? He says over here, Shelo kashur lo is still, as long as you put it in the corner, right? And this is what you use it for, you're allowed to use it. So Amar Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel says, Rabbi Yehuda ben Negrar. He says the halakha is like Rabbi Yehuda to do with neged anigra. So that's how he's saying that he were paskening. Okay. Amar Rava says vehu shekashu b'delet. However, though, it's only going to be the halakha like him if it's going to be tied to the door, because then it's nikar that you're using it. It's recognizable that you're using it in order to lock the door. So says the Gemara, any is it so? But Rabbi tavla ikla lemechuza. Rabbi, it once happened that he went to mechuza. And what happened was that he found an agar that he was talui, but not on the he didn't find this neged, which is this lock, which was talui on the delet itself, but rather be ivra dedisha. Ivra dedisha means bebriach adelet, which means it was tied to the door. Okay? And he didn't say anything. So says the Gemara, Hahuni tal bigdo hava. He says that was kashur to the chevel chazak. It was tied with a very, very tight, chevel. So let's see. No, this is the next picture. Is kilat chatanim. No. Okay, fine. So Amar Rav Yos. So says the Gemara now. Rav Avia ikla lenerda. Rav Avia went to visit Narda. Chazelu Gavra de Havaka Takati Begemi. So he saw a person that he was being kosher, he was tying up this neger, right, to the door with gemi, with mamash, with like an esev, which like with a thread, like with reeds, right? So he says, Amar, he said, then lo nitrok. With this, you cannot close the door on Shabbat. Why? Because this is not considered that it's actually tied. So since it's not considered that it's actually tied, it doesn't help. So by Rabbi Zera comes and he asks the following question: Nikmaz mahu, right? When right now a person is going to come and you're going to go into the actual hole. Okay? What's the halacha? Do we say that you're allowed to or not? Which means over here, this is the hole. Okay, so if right now, if it's going to be inside here, what's the halacha? Do we say that it's going to be permitted to open and close it on Shabbat or not because you're using that hole? So Amar Rav Yosef says, Rav Yosef, Maiti Baile. What's the question exactly? Lo shmiya le'ehad Tanya. He didn't hear that which we learned in the Braita. Nishmat asur. If right now is nishmat madelet, which means that the rope broke, you're not allowed to use it on Shabbat. Nikmaz, but if it's going to be nikmaz, it's mutar. Rabbi Yudah says nikmaz avbishen nishmat. Nikmaz, even though it's not going to be right, nishmat means it's still tied to the door. It's going to be asur. The Amar of Yudah Mishwal says Yudah Mishwal lacha is like Rabbi Yudah nikmaz. The lacha is like Rabbi Yudah nikmaz. So here Rabbi Yudah is actually more stringent, not more lenient, which means that even though it's going to be talui bedelet, it's kashur bedelet, it's still going to be asur because it's nikmaz. The tamamai, Amar Abaye says mishnunisi kimone, because it looks like you're building. Meaning when you come and you start putting into this hole, it looks like you're actually building something. Okay, so by Mineh Rav Nechumya ber Zecharia me Abaye. So asks Rav Nechumya ber Zecharia from Abaye, Asalo bet yad mahu. What's halacha if you came and you made like a bet yad, you make like a handle for it, in order that everyone sees that it's like a utensil? What's halacha? So Amaleu, he says, Amalei buchna kamarta. Are you talking about that you're talking about like a neged which is compared to a buchna, which is something that you come and you crush the wheat and things like that? Itmar was stated, the second that you make a handle, it's mutar, but then everyone sees that it's a utensil. You made a handle for it. It's not just a piece of wood that you're putting inside the ground. There was a korah that was in the house of Rabbi Pedat. Remember, the korah is the top beam. Okay, the wood on the beam, on the top. So it says over here, that they used to put it with 10 people up above. Right? That means 10 people had to come and pick it up. The Shadula Dasha. And they used to place it on top of the door in order to make sure, and that's how they used to lock the door during the nighttime. And nobody said anything. I mean, Rabbi Pedat did not come and say anything. Why? Shama, he said, it's like a kli. So if it's a kli, what's the problem? Fine. So it says the Gemara, who is Sita, there was a machteshet, which is like a grinder, right? That was in the house of Or Shmuel. Right? That it says over here, which was machzika, half of a kur. So what happened? It says here, Shara Mar Shmuel Mishtei Adasha. He wanted to put it on the door. Amar, he came and he said, it's a kli. So in all these cases, remember that if it's a kli, it's a kli. Okay? So he says, Shalach le Rami bar Yechezkel le Rav Amram. So Rami bar Yechezkel went and he sent to Rav Amram. Neima lamor mehala mile me'aliata tamala mishmed Ravasi bekipe d'arba. Please tell us some good things that you heard from Ravasi in kipe d'arba, in kipot shebesfina, which means that basically they used to come and they were in a boat and they used to put like a machzelet, like a carpet, in order to protect, whether it is from the rain or from the cold. So tell us, what did you hear in his name? So Shalachle, he sent him, Hachi Amar Ravasi, this is what Ravasi said. Hanikipe de Arba. These motot, which are in the sfina, which are basically these poles on the boat, you have a picture there on the bottom. Again, I don't know why anymore we don't have any pictures, but you have it on the bottom there. There's okay, the motot on the sfina. There's a boat and you have the motot. Okay? So he comes and he says, Hanikifa da arba, bizman sheyesh ba'en tefach, as long as it has a tefach in the thickness, inami, or if they don't have a tefach, but they don't have 3 tefachim between each one, the machar, the next day on Shabbat, and v'machser person, you're allowed to come and put a carpet on top of it, which means you put the poles, you put the beams, and now on Shabbat, I'm allowed to come and put the carpet on top of it. Why? Because either they don't have 3 tefachim between each one, so therefore I say levud and they're all connected. Or I'm going to come and say it doesn't have a thickness of a tefach. My tama, what's the reasoning? Mosif alal ohel araihu, because that's considered that you're being mosif, you're adding onto an ohel arai, the shapidami, and then it's permitted. So fine. So now dichre de havule le Rav Huna, right? Devimama ba'u tula velelia ba'u avira. He says they were elim, right? We're talking about rams that Rav Huna had that during the day they needed, right? It says over here they needed a lot of shade. Why? Because of the drought, because of the heat. Velelia, but in the nighttime ba'u avira, they needed the air, right? So what happened? So he says over here, Ata lekemed Rav. They came in front of Rav. Amalen, he told them, Zil kroch budia. Go and put the machzelet on top of the gag. V'shai betefach, but just leave a tefach above it. Umachar, the next day, pashta, just open it up. Mosif al orai, because then what are you doing? You're just being mosif on an orai. V'shapidami, you're allowed to. Which means in the nighttime, Erev Shabbat, what are you going to do? It's going to become nighttime. So since it's becoming nighttime, I just put the carpet, but I just leave a tefach open. Once the tefach is open in the nighttime, it's still open. So all the air comes in. So beautiful, they get the air. The next morning, what do? I come and I close the curtain. I close the carpet on top of this. So now what happens? I give them the shade. Since it was already open, the tefach, so therefore I'm only being mosif on all rai, and therefore I'm allowed to do that. So Amar Rav Mishum Rabbi Chia, says Rav in the name of Rabbi Chia, vilon mutal lintoto. The vilon which they actually hang on the entrance for tzniut, which is a curtain. They put a curtains there in order for tzniut. So what happens? You're allowed to put it and take it off on Shabbat. There's no problem. Why? But since it's not kavua and it's normally put the place there, so it's like a delit. It's like a house. It's like a door of the house. And you're allowed to open and close. This is the same thing. You're allowed to open and close. Right? Kilat chatanim. What about kilat chatanim? So here we do have the last, I think it's the last picture. Last one? Yeah, the last picture. So this is a kilat chatanim. Okay? So it says over here, the kilat chatanim, which is basically, this is for the chatan and kala's bed. That's why it's called kilat chatanim. So it says over here, mutal leforka on tota b'Shabbat. You're allowed to put it up and take it down on Shabbat. Why? Because it's not considered now ohel, because since it's made, right, it doesn't have a roof. Basically, it's made straight here. There's no roof, right? There's no roof up here. This is just going straight down. So therefore, since it's going straight down, there's no roof. You're allowed to put it on. So it says the Gemara, Amarav Sheshat Bered Ravidi. That's only if over here you don't have a tefach, right? That's what it says over here. In the gag, you don't have a tefach, but when it says over here, but if it does have a tefach, it's going to be a sur. Which means here I have 3 tefachim. I need to have it that within the top 3 tefachim, there's not a tefach, which is 8 centimeters over here, which is a very small amount. Yeah. So it says over here, because the way that it looks here, there's much more, right? This looks much more than a tefach. But again, this is just a picture, okay? So he says, but if you do have, right, a tefach within the first 3 tefachim from the top, it's going to be a sur, okay? And not only this is also, we didn't say this, you don't have in the shipua tefach, which is the actual slant tefach. But if you do have a tefach, so it says shipua le oalin kolin dami, so it's like an ohel, and therefore it's going to be a sur. Okay, so here we're talking about the slant. You have a tefach between one and the other. So v'amar of Shisha bered Ravidi, says of Shisha, the son of Ravidi, Siana, which is a kova shelevid. It's like a type of a straw hat. Yeah, shadi, it's going to be permitted to go out with it on Shabbat. So ask the Gemara, Tanya Asur. I thought we learned that it's going to be Asur. So says the Gemara, La kasha, it's not a question. Why? Hadith batefach, hadele betefach. It all depends whether it has a tefach or not. If the rim has a tefach, right, so then what happens is it's considered a tent. It's considered an ohel. If it doesn't have a tefach, it's not a problem, which usually nowadays the majority of hats do not have it. Yeah, which means that even if you take the regular black hats and you put your hand, you usually don't have 8 centimeters of the rim. Okay? Ela me'ata, so now they're going to ask the following question. Sharbiv beglimeh, what happens if he's going to be Masechta talit, right? That it's going to go outside of his head more a tefach. That means he puts his talit over his head and it comes out more than a tefach. So he says, so what's going to, are you going to tell me it's a sur? It's not a question. He says that which of Shisha came and told you could go with this hat is that when it's meudak on your head. So since it's meudak on your head, it's tied to your head. So if we're not going to suspect that maybe the ruach, the wind, is going to come and take it outside of the motor, you're going to carry it. But here, if it's not going to be tied to your head, and maybe it's going to blow off, and then you're going to carry it, it's going to be a problem. Okay? Mishnah, first Mishnah, Kuvbet Amubed. Remember, there are 3 Mishnayot here. Okay? Mishnah number 1. Machzirin sira tachton b'mikdash, aval lo b'medina. Which means that right now, if you had a door which is connected with the hinges or the pivots to the door, right, to the doorpost, and what happens is that it falls out, it disconnects. So you're allowed to come and put it back, whether it's the door of an aron or a teva or whatever it is, and you're allowed to put it back into its place, b'mikdash and the bet mikdash, because again, remember, since it's only nisur d'rabbanan, because it looks like you're building, so therefore in the bet mikdash they weren't gozer on isurim d'rabbanan. Aval lo b'medina, but not outside of the bet mikdash. Okay, va'elyon. But if it's going to be the upper pivot, the upper hinge, kan vekan, doesn't matter whether you're in the bet mikdash or not, it's going to be asur, right? Why? Because then what happens is the entire thing could fall. So it's considered completely separate. So since the entire thing is considered completely separate, now you do have an isur of boneh from the Torah. So therefore now it's going to be prohibited. Yudah Omer Yudah says, ha'elyon b'mikdash, right? When we said that it's permitted, it's talking about the upper one of the bet mikdash. That's tachton b'medina. And the lower one, right, you're allowed to put it back. That's only in the Medina. Okay? Fine. So which means that even in the Medina, not only, sorry, even in the Medina, you're allowed to take it back. So basically, the Rabbi Yudah is coming and just saying where exactly you're allowed to permit it to put it back. It has nothing to do with, it all depends where you are, the top one or the bottom one. So Tan Rabbanan, we're going to learn, right, that tzir shel deleshida, right, v'teva umigdal, whether we're talking about the hinges, the bottom one, of a door, right, or any type of like a cupboard, right, or a box, right, or a migdal, or of a tower. B'migdash machzirim b'mdina dochakim. When it's going to talk about in the Bet HaMikdash, you're allowed to actually put it back. B'mdina, if it's talking about outside of the Bet HaMikdash, dochakim, you push it, right, back to its place. But if it completely came out, you're not allowed to put it back. Meaning that if it's just that you push it back down, you're allowed to. But if you completely have to put it in, then it's going to be asur. Okay? Va'elyon, but if it's going to be the top one, kan vekan lo yachzir, you're not allowed to put it back inside. So why? Izra shema yitka. Because maybe you're going to hit it very, very hard with like a hammer. And vimtaka, and if you do that, then you're going to be chayav chatat. Because that's the melacha gemura min Torah. Okay, because there's binyan bekelim. Boneh, or because of makeh patish, whichever one that you want. But it's going to be one of those problems. Okay? Then it says shel bor, shel dut, shel yatzia. But if we're talking about the hinge of a bor, yatzia, or a dut, right? So remember, the bor is just you dug a hole, right? The dut is actually like a underground, like a cellar or like a bottom floor, which means it's not just a pit, you actually built into the ground. Right? V'shel yatzia is a binyan namuch, which is close to a house, right on the side. It's like it's a low building. Lo yachzir, you're not allowed to put it back in. But if you do put it back in, you're going to be chayav chatat. Because anything that you do from this is considered melechet boneh because it's attached to the ground. Any of these things are built into the ground, or even if it's going to be just on top of the pit on the ground, so therefore it's going to be asur. Okay. Says the Mishnah. This is the second Mishnah in the Daf. Okay, and Daf Kuvbet Amubet over there. So it says like this: Machzirin retiyah b'mikdash, a kohen that has a makah, he's got a wound, so he puts a bandage on it, a plaster. So he's allowed to put it back on, right? Again, even with this type of a cream or whatever it is that's on, right? Because again, if he has to work on Shabbat, so he's allowed to do it, and he took it off, so it should be a chatzitza. Afterwards, he's allowed to put it back on, and there's no problem. Avalo b'medina, but not outside of the Bet HaMikdash. Right? Why? Because it says gzera, maybe you're going to come and you're going to do an isur min Torah memachek, that you're going to spread it on the skin, which is memachek. Im batchila, if it's the first time, which means that you never actually had the bandage on you before Shabbat, and now this is the first time that you're putting it on, kam vekan asur, you're not allowed, whether it's in the Bet HaMikdash or the Medina, you're not allowed to put it on. Okay? Fine. Says the Gemara. Tanu Rabbanan, we learned in a Braita. Retiyah shepirsha me'al gabe makah. What happens if the plaster started falling off the makah? So you have the bandage, and all of a sudden it's peeling off. It's starting to come off. Machzirin, you're allowed to put it back on Shabbat. Rabbi Yehuda says, "Uchleka lemata." If it just moved from its place downwards, push it back upwards. Docha lemala. Lemala, docha, if it was pushed upwards, push it downwards. Megale miktzat haretiya umekareach pi hamaka. You're allowed to reveal part of the bandage and clean the makah, clean the wound. And then again, you could reveal the other part and clean the wound. But you're not allowed to actually come and clean the actual bandage. Because that's memareach. And if you did do memareach, you're chayav chatat. You're going to be chayav chatat. So Amar of Yehuda ben Shmuel says of Yehuda ben Shmuel, the lacha is like a Yehuda. You're not allowed to put it back. Okay? So Amar of Chasta says of Chasta, Lo shanu, what are we dealing with? Ela shepirsha gabe keli. That you came and you separated it on top of a kli, which means it fell on top of a utensil, whether it's a kar or a keset or things like that. Okay? So he says, aval pirsha, however though, right? He comes and he says, pirshal gabe karka, but if it was separated on top of the ground, right? Divra kol, according to everybody, it's going to be asur. So Amar Mor Baravashi says, Mor Baravashi, I was in front of Abaye, v'nafla le'abe sadya, and it fell on the kar, right, which was on by his head. Okay? V'kamadale, and he put it back on. Aminale, I told him, why you don't hold this sort of chasta, right? That it says machloke shepirsha gabe kliya v'pirsha gabe karka asu. The only machloket is if it fell on top of a utensil, but if it fell on top of the ground, it's going to be asur to put it back on. So it comes out that Rabbi Yehuda was arguing, and he says it's asur to put it back on. So therefore, this one that it fell on top of a utensil, right? Only in this case he permitted the Tanakama. Shmuel says Rabbi Yehuda, which you're not allowed to put it back on. Okay, so he comes and he says as follows. Amali, so he comes and he says Lo shmiali, I didn't hear it. Klomar, which means to say Lo svirle, not that I didn't hear it. Sometimes you hear something, but you just don't hold of it. So here, that's what he says. He says Lo shmiali akavana, klomar Lo svirle, I don't hold of it. Which means that Rav Ashi actually argues on Rav Chasta, and he holds the machloket Tanaim is only going to be a retiyah that fell on the ground. But if it fell on top of the kli, then even according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're allowed to put it back on, and that's why you put it back on. And that's what he was actually doing. Okay? Now, the last Mishnah on the Kupet Amubet. Koshrin nima b'migdash, avalo b'medina. You're allowed to tie a nima. So nima is, it says over here, from the kinor, from the harp. So on the harp, you have these strings. Okay? Is what? Was it mitar?
Yeah, mitar.
Okay, the mitar. Right? How do you say it in English?
Music.
This is string.
String. Okay, so the string.
A harp string.
A harp string. Okay. So it says over here like this. So it says koshin nima. So you're allowed to come and you're allowed to tie this mitar, this string, right, of the harp. Right? It says over here, shayul v'min gimbo. Right? They used to come and they used to play with it during the time of Nisuch Hayayin. So now what happens if it broke on Shabbat? So you're allowed to tie it up in the Bet HaMikdash. Right? Why? Because it's for the Avodah, the Bet HaMikdash. And therefore, he says, even though here there is a melecha of kosher min Torah. Because it says here, even machshirei mitzvah dochim et Shabbat. So here, that's the difference. Here it's mamash toraita, but here you're allowed to do it. Aval lo b'medina, but not outside of the Bet HaMikdash. V'im batchila, but if it actually broke the first time around, which means, not broke the first time in there. It was never there the first time around, meaning that they had the harp, but they never actually put these strings inside the harp. Kan v'kan asur, it's always going to be asur. So says the Gemara, or Minu, we have a contradiction. Nimat kinor shenifsika. What happens if you have this string of the harp that broke? Loya koshra, you wouldn't do a kesher, a regular kesher. Ela unva, you would make a kesher aniva, which is like a bow knot. So it comes out, which is not that strong.
Because kino is a kino. Harp is never. It's two different things. Harp is what they played in the Bet HaMikdash. Kino is not. And here in Hebrew is just kino. So I'm sorry I'm stopping you, but please. Never and kino are different things.
How does it translate there, the kinor? The
flute.
No, it can't be flat. Koshrin nima. What does it say there, John Paul, in English?
It's a string of a harp.
The harp. That's the harp. Here, actually, in modern Hebrew, a kinor is a violin, but it wasn't a violin. I don't know. That's what it says here. It's a harp. It's a harp, yeah. I
The
don't know.
harp also, I follow on the point by point. It said that it's a harp.
Okay. Nimat kinor shel shir sheyolvim lekorban. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. I guess the modern Hebrew is different. So it says over here like this. So koshrin, we're talking about here, nimat kinor shenifseka. So if it actually broke, you wouldn't do a regular knot, but rather you would do kesher aniva, which is like a bow knot. So it says, that's not a question. Har Rabbanan, Har Rabbi Eliezer. He says this is a Rabbanan, and this is Rabbi Eliezer, which means the Braita, which does not permit you only to do a kesher aniva, is Rabbanan. But Rabbi Eliezer permits you to do a regular one. Rabbi Eliezer, Damar Mashiyeh Mitzvah Dochin et Shabbat, because according to Rabbi Eliezer, that he says the Machshireh Mitzvah also pushes off the Shabbat. So therefore, kosher, you could do a regular knot. But according to the rabbis, that they say that Machshireh Mitzvah, that means anything which prepares for Mitzvah, does not push off the Shabbat. You can't do a regular knot. You could only do Kesher Aniva, which is not a strong knot. It's a bow tie knot. Ik Rabbi Eliezer, so ask the Gemara 1 second. If it's like Rabbi Eliezer, so then even lechatchila do it then. If Machshireh Mitzvah dochim et Shabbat, so even lechatchila put these how do you call the strings in the harp on Shabbat. So it says the Gemara, no. Ela la kashia. Ha Rabbi Yehuda, ha Rabbanan. He says one of them is Rabbi Yehuda, that there's no difference between a Kesher Aniva on Shabbat, right? And Veha Rabbanan, the other one is it's Rabbanan, that they said that Kosher Min HaTorah is only in a regular Kesher, but Aniva is going to be permitted. Because according to Rabbi Yehuda, Kesher Aniva was also prohibited. There's no difference. It's all Asur. Rabbi Yehuda Aliba Deman. So who does Rabbi Yehuda go in accordance with? So says the Gemara Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph on the top, 103A1. I Aliba de Rabbi Eliezer Kamar. If he's going in accordance to Rabbi Eliezer, he says, Afilu lechatchila nami. So then even lechatchila it should be that way. But rather it's not a question. Right? What does that mean? Ha Rabbi Shimon, Ha Rabbanan. One of them is Rabbi Shimon, that he permits to connect it through tying. And one of them is Rabbanan. The Tanya was learned in the Braita. Ben Levi shenifseka lo nima bekinor. What about a Ben Levi that the harp, the string broke? So lekoshra, so it says over here, right? What happens? It says over here, you're allowed to tie it in a regular knot. Rabbi Shimon says, on vai, you have to actually do a bow knot. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says, af he, also this one that broke, ena mashmat et kol. It's not going to have the same sound. Ela mishalshel milemata. But rather, what are you supposed to do? In order to fix it, you have to go downwards. That means downwards to upwards. Okay, vekorech milmala. And then you're going to put it on the top. Or mishalshel milmala vekorech milmata. Or to go the other way around.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, whichever way that it is. But basically, you have to do it in another way that in order to make the sound properly. So obviously, there's a problem of makebe patish, but still, he says that this is better to doing it that way, because that way you're actually making it that the sound, meaning if you're just going to come and make a knot, or even whether it's a bow tie, that's even worse. But even if it's a regular knot, at the end of the day, it's not going to make the same sound. So what he's trying to do is to try to make the same sound. You come and you push it downwards, and then you're going to tie it somewhere else, and that way it's actually going to make a better sound. Or if you want, you can answer another answer. We're both talking about the Shitat Rabbanan. It's still not a question. Why? Here we're talking about where it broke in the middle. And therefore, if you broke in the middle and you do a Kesher Aniva, it's not going to make a proper sound. Here we're talking about where it broke on the side, which means close to one of the two corners, meaning like on the top or the bottom. There, it would still make a good sound, even though you're going to tie it with a Kesher Aniva. If you want, you can answer, it broke in the middle. More Savar Gazrin, and one man comes and he says, what Rabbi Shimon says, that we're going to make a Gezerah, that you shouldn't make a Kesher Gamur, right? Because maybe you're going to make a Kesher Gamur, even if it wasn't on the tzad, right? And therefore, you would only be permitted to do Kesher Niva. More Savar, and the other one, which is the Chachamim hold, that we don't make such a decree, and therefore, even if it was in the middle, you're allowed to make a regular Kesher, a regular knot, and there's no problem. Okay? Fine, so Kakadosh, we're continuing now with the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph on the top, where it says like this: right, you're allowed to cut a yabelet. A yabelet usually is like these blisters. How do you say it in English?
Blister.
Blister? Yeah, okay. So you're allowed to cut a yabelet on in the Bet HaMikdash, but not in the Medina. What is it? A wart? No.
Wart. Yes. Wart.
Yes. Okay. So it says over here, which means like this. It says you're allowed to cut this yabelet in the Mikdash, but not in the Medina, right? So it says over here because it's a Yisur Durabanan. So he says ve'im bekli, but if you're going to use a utensil, then it becomes doraita, so then it becomes kind of asur. Then it's going to be asur on both of them. So ask the Gemara, we have a contradiction. Whether it is that you're going to come, and it says here we're talking about the Korban Pesach. So he says that even though the Korban Pesach is doched Shabbat, herkevo, which means putting it on top of your arms, on your shoulders, right? In the Reshut Rabim, vavato, or bringing it outside of the Tchum Shabbat, v'chatichat yebalto, or cutting a wart, and dochin, they don't push off the Shabbat, and you're not allowed to do it, right? Even though through that you can bring the Korban Pesach, because obviously a yabelet is actually going to prohibit, right? Whether it is on the bringing a korban, whether it is on a human being or not. So Rabbi Eliezer says all these things push off the Shabbat, okay? Which means, but since you're not allowed to, it's a right. So that means this Mishnah is actually coming and telling you that you're not allowed to remove a yabelet on Shabbat, right? This is a stira to our Mishnah. So says the Gemara, Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina, Chadamar, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Chanina. One of them said ha belacha. One of them said we're talking about a yabelet lacha, which means that the wart is still moist, and therefore it's still part of the animal. Velakashia, but it's not a question, it's not a contradiction. Kam biyad, bekam bekli. One of them we're talking about with your hand. That means you're removing it with your hand, right? And therefore, since it's only Yisur D'Rabbanan, it's permitted in the Bet HaMikdash. And one of them you're doing it with a utensil. The Chadaman, and one of them said, ha biyad, we're both talking about in your hand. Velakashia, it's not a question. Ha belacha biyavesha. If it's going to be lach, right, which means moist, so it's a sur because of like gozez. It's like you're shearing the wool. So it's the same thing. So he says, but if it's going to be avesh, which means that it's not anymore connected to the animal because it's like dry, so therefore it's like it stopped its nourishment from the animal, so therefore it's going to be permitted. But according to the mandama that says that here we're talking about whether the hand or utensil, so why didn't you just say to answer up the stiran the mishnayot, just say this in front. So he's going to answer you, when it's dry, you're allowed to cut it off even with a utensil. What's the reasoning? Because it's already nifredim natzma, which means that when you come and you cut it, you're not cutting basar chai. You're cutting something which is dead. It's like not connected. It's like already dead. It's not there. It's not getting any nourishment. But according to the mandama that says, why didn't he say habiyah bil-kli? Why did he say one is with your hand, one is with the kli? The kli is doraita asur. Hand is permitted. It's the rabbanan. He's going to tell you bekli hatnan im bekli kam v'kan asur. What do you mean? It's already written in Furash in the Mishnah that if you do it with a utensil, it's both going to be asur. So therefore, you didn't have to come and say that because you already know that. Beidach and the other mandamar hadiktani hatan, that which we learned over there with the kli mishum dekam palge, right? Rabbi Eliezer Rabbanan, because there we wanted to make a machloke between Rabbi Eliezer Rabbanan to teach us that Rabbi Eliezer comes and he says that it's going to be permitted to take off the yabelet in the mikdash even with a utensil. Beidach and the other mandamar dumya derkevo v'avato michutz tchum tani. It's exact same like the putting it on your shoulders and taking it outside of the tchum, right? That it says that it's going to be that it's a sumi d'Rabbanan. And therefore, here when the Mishnah comes and it says you're going to cut it with your hand, it's going to sur only d'Rabbanan and not with the utensil which we doraita. V'idach, the other one, he says herkevo is not like Rabbi Natan. Why? Because according to Rabbi Natan, the amar achai noset atzmo, right? He says that the animal carries itself, meaning a living animal carries itself. Havato michutz tchum is like Rabbi Akiva, but he says tchumin is doraita. So therefore, since it's going to be doraita, right, that's why he's saying it's a completely different halacha. It's obviously here, everything's doraita. So Mativ, Rav Yosef comes and he asks the following question. Amar Rabbi Eliezer, says Rabbi Eliezer, kal vachomer, it's a kal vachomer. Uma shchita, shehi mishum melacha docha et Shabbat, just like shchita is a melacha. You're not allowed to do shchita on Shabbat, it's doraita. And still it's going to be dochet Shabbat, but you're allowed to do a korban pesach on Shabbat. You're allowed to do shchita. Elu, these things which are the preparations, that it's only going to be mishum shvut, the rabbanans, eno din shidchut Shabbat. If you're permitted to do a doraita on Shabbat, shouldn't it be that you're permitted to do the rabbanan on Shabbat? Again, only in the Bet HaMikdash. We're not talking about anywhere else, but only in the Bet HaMikdash. So says the Gemara, Elama Rav Yosef, or rather Rav Yosef says, ha bayad. Really, we're talking about that you're using your hand, ushvut b'mikdash, and therefore we're talking about the rabbanans in the Bet HaMikdash. B'mikdash itiru shvut b'mikdash, b'medina lo itiru. So he says like this. In the Bet HaMikdash, you're allowed to come and you're allowed to do it. Why? Because en shu b'mikdash, there's no drabanans in the Bet HaMikdash. When it has to do with avodah, obviously. Okay? But he says, but b'medina, they didn't permit it. So Yativ Abai bekama la'ashmata. So Abai was sitting and he said this braita. Ve'et ve'Rav Safra l'Abai. So Rav Safra came and he asked Rav Abai from the Mishnah and said, "Zayin mubet. Haya koreh besefer." Imagine right now a person's reading a book, right, of Kitvei HaKodesh, like a Megillah. Ala iskupa on the doorpost. V'nitgalgel hasefer miyado, and it all of a sudden rolls down from his hand. So you could bring it back up. So he says, 1 second. V'ahacha deshvut mikdash b'mdinahu. Right here, when we're talking about now that this is happening outside of the Bet HaMikdash, but we didn't actually come and we didn't decree. Meaning there, we should have said it's a sur. We didn't say it's a sur, it's the Rabbanan. But 1 second, I thought you only permit the Rabbanans in the Mikdash, not outside of the Mikdash. So says the Gemara, right? There we don't prohibit it, and we don't say dimanafil, maybe it's going to fall. Maybe it's going to fall, and you're going to bring it back to you completely. And then it's going to become completely asur. So says the Gemara, 1 second. Didn't we say that we're already talking about that the doorpost was like a Carmelit and not the Reshut HaYachid? Ushut Rabim over Lefanei, the Reshut Rabim is there. Since you still have part of the Sefer in your hand, afilu shvut namileka. So then there's not even Isur de Rabbanan. He says, why? Because even if the entire Sefer came out of your hand, it's only going to be an Isur de Rabbanan. There's no Doraitas. So since there's no Doraitas, that's why they didn't make any decree. Okay, that means basically it was not the same case. That means what you're asking me is not a good question. So he asked another question, Rav Yosef. You're allowed to bring down the Korban Pesach into the oven im chashecha, mamash when it's coming shchiyah. Here we're talking about the shvut of the Mikdash. But Medina, when it's outside of the Bet Mikdash, we don't make comment, we don't make a decree. Maybe you're going to come stoke the coals. So Ishtik, here he did keep quiet. He didn't know what to answer. So Katzah the commander of Yosef, when he came in front of Yosef, Amalei, he went and he said, Hachi Amalei Safra, this is what Rav Safra said. Amalei, he went and he told him, Rav Yosef told Abaye, my Tama, why didn't you answer him? Why didn't you answer him? Bnei Chaburaz is in him. The people that are doing the Korban Pesach, they're very, very quick. So ever since they're very, very quick, Chachamim come and quick here means that they're metaktekim b'mitzvot. Not only just quick mitzad, zrizut sometimes can mean quick, and sometimes zrizut is like from zirut. So ever since they're very zrizin, they're metaktekim b'mitzvot, we're not going to suspect that they're going to come stoking the coals, and therefore that's why it's permitted for them to do it. That's why they didn't make any decree. It's a special circumstances. Abaye, and according to Abaye, kohanim zrizim hen amrinan, bnei chabura zrizim lo amrinan. So according to Abaye, he only held that the kohanim are the ones which are zrizim, but not the bnei chabura, which are not miuchadim from other people. They're not different from other people. So for there, not zrizim. Rava says, Rabbi Eliezer here, really be'emet, to answer up these two mishnayot, we could just answer very, very simply. It's Rabbi Eliezer. The Amri Rabbi Eliezer always says, Machshirei mitzvah dochin et Shabbat. Any type of machshirei mitzvah, which means preparations for mitzvah, they push off the Shabbat. However, though Rabbi Eliezer says, even though you're supposed to do that, as long as you can change it, try to change it as much as possible, not to make it the doraita. Okay? So Maihi, right? What exactly is Rabbi Eliezer coming to teach you that you should change as much as possible? The Tanya was learned in a Braita, Kohen shalta bo yabelet. When a Kohen has a yabelet on his body, chavero chotcha lo b'shinav. His friend could actually cut it off with his teeth. Right? That means basically his friend will come with his teeth and cut off the wart, right? In order to change. So b'shinav in, only with his teeth, yes. Beklilod, but not with his with the utensil. Chavero in, only his friend, but he himself, no. Iulo. Mani, who is this? So he says, Ilam, if you're going to tell me it's Rabbanan, Uba Migdash, and we're talking about in the Bet HaMikdash, Kevin Damni Rabbanan, since the rabbis say Be'alma, right? In a normal case, Mishum Shvut, that it's the Rabbanan. So what's the difference in him and his friend? If anyway, it's only an Isud de Rabbanan, what do I care about me or my friend doing it? But rather, he says, Rabbi Eliezer, it has to be the Rabbi Eliezer, that usually he says that this is going to be considered Chayav Chatat. And here, even though it's going to be Mashir Mitzvah, it's Tochin et Shabbat, you should still change. So therefore, since you should still change as much as possible, that's why it's going in Shitat Rabbi Eliezer. Okay? So says the Gemara, no, I disagree with you. Leolam Rabbanan, really it's not Rabbi Eliezer, it's the rabbis. V'yalta bekreso, and if it would have come in the stomach of the Kohen, hachanami, then you're right. Then the Kohen is going to allow to be cutting it off, whether it's going to be with his hands or with his teeth, right? Because then there's only Nisud de Rabbanan. What are we dealing with here? On shaltalo neshicha begabo, it came up on his back, right? Uvatzila yedav, or on the back of his hands, or here it says marpekav.
The elbow.
Yeah, the elbow, the back of the elbow. Because he can't take it. Marpeko. No, again, that's what I have in my art school, in the small letters, right? In the other letters, it says marpeko. So he says, what does that mean? That basically I can't bite it off. Look, I can't get there. I obviously can't do that to my back, because even if I would turn my head somehow magically to right around, I still can't go downwards. So whichever way, basically, I can't do it. So he says, right, the ihu lo matzi shakele, he himself can't do it. So therefore, that's why he's saying that it has to be somebody else that's doing it for him. Now, vida banan. So if you're going to tell me it's already the rabbis, nishkele nahale biyad. So why don't you just cut it off with his hands, right? V'tifsho de Rabbi Eliezer, and why don't we just Rabbi Elazar, dama Rabbi Elazar, machloket biyad. The machloket is only going to be with your hands. But if it's going to be with utensils, according to everybody, you're going to be chayav. So he says, "V'litamech," and according to your reasoning, that Rabbi Eliezer nami lishkele nabi. Why, according to Rabbi Eliezer, you should also take it off with your hands? So he says, "Haimai, what is this? Iyam Rabbi Shlema Rabbi Eliezer. If you're going to tell me it's Rabbi Eliezer, right, that he comes and he says, Hainu de gazer yada tukli. So then you're going to make a gezerah that you're not allowed to take it off with your hand. Gezerah, maybe you're going to take it off with a kli, and then with a kli, it's going to be doraita. But if you're going to tell me it's the rabbis, nishkelena ba'adiyad, you could take it off with your hand. Vetulomidid, you don't have to add anything else whatsoever, right? And therefore, that's why he's coming and he's saying, therefore, we could actually come and say that there is a mekor to say that this is going according to Rabbi Eliezer, that even though machshirei mitzvah dochim et Shabbat, as long as you could change it as much as possible, this is exactly what we're trying to do. And this is what we're going to do. Okay, so therefore, Bezat Hashem, we continue tomorrow.